see if you can toggle through there.
Yes.
There we go.
I don't know why it didn't work the last time. Anyhow, okay. So probably everybody in this audience knows, but Indian River Lagoon is 156 miles long, touching 6 counties, but 71% of the area of the lagoon is in Brevard County. And so most of the pollution that we experience is from local sources. And the good news about that is that we then have the ability and opportunity to do something about it and improve the health of the lagoon. So the half-cent sales tax was adopted by the voters. The photograph here, MRC had a long history of organizing this Hands Across the Lagoon event as the health of the system was unraveling, and helped to create a lot of the awareness of the community of the needs of the lagoon, and support of the mission of the half-cent sales tax restoration plan to restore the Indian River Lagoon through collaborative science-based projects that reduce and remove pollution to benefit our community, economy, and natural resources. We have delivered 81 projects now, and we have 27 that are currently under construction and 43 more in design. Those are bigger projects. In addition to those, we have loads of individual homeowner projects, of which 677 have been completed. And then we monitor the performance of a subset of our projects to make sure that they are delivering what we expect them to deliver in terms of performance. And we have some public information campaigns to help the public know what they can do to reduce their footprint of pollution on the lagoon. And when I say we have completed 81 projects, it's a big royal community-wide we. So you see there, the cities are all very much engaged, along with Brevard Zoo and MRC and the Merritt Island Redevelopment Agency. So it takes a village. And our strategy is to reduce the incoming sources of nitrogen, excess nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, remove the excess legacy load that's already in the lagoon, begin restoration of natural filter feeders, and then respond to new information and opportunities. The structure of the plan is a decision science kind of structure. So using the best available data and experts at the time. Don't wait for perfect answers before moving forward. Take what we know, pick those no regret strategies and get going, and then continue to refine as we go. I aim for the major sources of pollution, schedule projects in parallel and in series. So, some projects make sense to do before other projects. Ideally, we would stop polluting before we started removing pollution from the lagoon, but there's so much pollution in the lagoon, and there's so much pollution to stop coming in that we really can't wait and do it in that order. We've got to do both in parallel. But we are conscientious of where we can, trying to reduce upland sources before removal projects in specific areas. And our goal is we're trying to optimize the return on that local investment of tax dollars. We're also hoping to foster innovation. And in fact, we have already fostered innovation and adaptation to minimize cost and risk going forward. So historically, our sources of nitrogen is good, but excess nitrogen is problematic. It feeds algae blooms that are harmful to seagrass and other water quality aspects of the lagoon. And historically, the biggest source of excess nitrogen loading was point sources, specifically wastewater treatment plant discharges. Those were addressed back in the early 1990s with the Indian River Lagoon Act. And So this large green bar has was significantly reduced, while these other sources of loading have increased, with the exception of stormwater runoff, which the county and municipalities and other counties along the lagoons enacted stormwater utilities, mostly during the 90s, and also started many stormwater projects. So when you look at the distribution of loading sources, oh, why did that? Hang on, hit the wrong button. What these sources look like now, the point sources are way down, except for the occasional overflows like we've experienced this weekend with the heavy rainfalls. And stormwater runoff is down some, though it's still one of the leading contributors. Whereas muck has continued to build up in the lagoon. Septic sources have increased with more and more development, and other sources of groundwater pollution have increased over the last couple decades. So we had determined that groundwater was a major source of loading, excess nutrient loading to the lagoon, but we needed a better understanding of what those sources of pollution were to our groundwater. And Lisa Soto, when she was the executive director of Marine Resources Council and holding an adjunct faculty position with Florida Tech, we partnered with her and Applied Ecology, got $1 million investment from the state to start a groundwater monitoring program. We've had 45 wells collecting groundwater data for over a year, over 5 years, monthly data for over 5 years. And this has allowed us to compare the groundwater nitrogen concentrations and phosphorus concentrations in natural control areas, the little green bar. So you see the nitrogen concentrations in groundwater should be low. And then in septic communities is the red bar, obviously quite high. And then in sewer communities, much lower than the red bar, but still there's impact there, higher than natural controls, and that's from our fertilizer, our pet waste, car wash water, all those other things that those decisions that we make at our homes that contribute pollution in our yards. And then, reclaimed water. We were concerned that reclaimed water could be a significant source, and this data collection effort has confirmed that. And so this was really informative and useful because it supported what we thought we needed to do, which was upgrade our wastewater treatment plants so that the quality. Sorry, I thought I was in better shape than this. The quality of that reclaimed water is better with lower nutrient concentrations that can be absorbed mostly by people's lawns. So I'm going to run through sort of a high level view of how the plan dollars are invested. So the first thing are these wastewater treatment facility upgrades to reduce the nutrient concentration in reclaimed water. So over $27 million is going to 8 projects. Of those, 4 have been completed, 1's under design, and 2 are in, or 1 is under construction and 2 are in design. And collectively, those projects are going to remove 74,000 pounds of excess nitrogen per year. And the cost of these is quite efficient at $383 per pound. So these statistics I'm going to run through for the project types that are in the plan. So you'll be able to see, which project types are getting the majority of the funds and how many projects there are and how much loading they're going to reduce and what their cost effectiveness is. Shortly after adoption of the half-cent sales tax, hurricane came through and there were sewage overflows. And so trying to understand, where those sewage overflows come from We realized that we have a lot of leaking and failing sewage infrastructure. The wastewater treatment plants have been using smoke testing and cameras to try to better maintain and strengthen their collection systems. But all the private pipes from people's homes, from the connection at your home out to the right-of-way where you connect to the public system, is also old and aging and has leaks in it. And so we funded smoke testing to identify where those leaks were. And we completed 4 out of 5 smoke testing projects. Over 41,000 homes have been smoke tested. And of those, we found 649 leaks. And about 2/3 of those leaks have been repaired so far. Also, after adoption of the tax, once we realized how important the wastewater treatment plants were, we realized that there are a couple dozen private package plants still in the county. There used to be a couple hundred of these. A lot of them were demolished and connected to central sewer back in the 1990s, but a few dozen still remain. This is one of them, Oak Point. It serves a mobile home park of 108 homes. And the building there on the lower right is the actual package treatment plant. And the secondarily treated effluent from that plant goes to that pond there in the middle of the photograph. And during storm events, that pond overflows directly into the lagoon at the top of the screen. And so we were super excited to work with the private owner to abandon this system and get it connected to centralized wastewater treatment. And we're now moving forward with 3 more private property owners to abandon their package plants and connect them to central sewer. All right, septic systems. So people think that the magic happens in the septic tank, but very little magic happens in the septic tank. There's just a little bit of settling of solids and floating of fats and grease, and effluent, which still has most of the nutrients in it, is then distributed to the groundwater through the leach field, through the drain field. And so 10 to 30% nitrogen reduction can occur if that drain field has sufficient separation from the groundwater table for ammonia to break down and convert to nitrogen gas and bubble up into the atmosphere so that it's not in that groundwater flowing to the lagoon. 2 things have to happen. First, it's got to oxidize as it trickles from the drain field through the sandy soils down to the groundwater. And then once it's oxidized, it's got to be denitrified by anaerobic bacteria that are in the soil that the groundwater is moving through. Those anaerobic bacteria can't work if the first step, the oxidation step, doesn't happen, trickling from the drain field down to the groundwater. So if the drain field is too close to the groundwater table, because sea level has risen, because old systems weren't as elevated above the groundwater as we know that they need to be today, or if it's because it's built on a old sand dune, and we know how quickly water just trickles right through sand. So all of those things lead to that first step not happening. And so then we have a lot of ammonia still reaching the lagoon in a bioavailable form that readily feeds algae blooms. Factors that really influence septic loading are distance from open waters, height above the groundwater, and the sediment type that the drain field sits in. So I know we've been through this in past years, but there are recent articles that seem to confuse, take our data and recombine it in improper way. So I want to try to run through this if my voice holds out. So we have over 53,000 septic tanks in Brevard County that load to the Indian River Lagoon, and they're distributed at various distances from the open water. And so about 15,000 of those 53 are close to the water. They're within 55 yards of the water. And so because those systems are so close to the water, they are the ones that load the most nutrients to the lagoon. And so all the septic in the county loads about 400,000 pounds of nitrogen to the lagoon. Those 15,000 that are closest to the lagoon are responsible for nearly 300 pounds. So almost 3/4 of that loading. So, if we don't have enough money to do everything, we want to focus on those that are going to make the biggest difference. Then when we look at those 15,000 systems and look specifically at what is the conductivity of those soils, how sandy are those soils, you see that the ones that are in the sandiest soil, the 8,000 that are in those highest conductivity soils, they are responsible for over half, 200,000 pounds of that loading. So, okay, so we can zero in on those 8,000 systems. Then if you take those 8,000 systems and you look even more closely, how close are they to open water? The 5,600 of them that are within 30 feet, 35 feet of the lagoon, they are responsible for almost half of the loading. Those that are in sandy soils or high conductivity soils, very close to the lagoon, are responsible for nearly half of the loading, right? So of those 53,000 tanks loading 400 pounds to the lagoon, we could, in theory, focus on just roughly 10% of them and reduce that load by about 50%. Now, the trick to that is that we can't just magically have sewer delivered to those specific homes. You have to bring in a sewer line from wherever the nearest lift station is. You got to pass through a whole community. If you're running a sewer line down a street, you're not going to just hook up the people on the waterfront side of the road. You're also going to hook up the ones on the other side of the street. And if the streets are perpendicular to the lagoon, you're not going to just run the whole line down the street to pick up the house at the end of the road. You're going to pick up all the houses along that street. And so our sewer projects, we mapped where are these most important systems to focus on. And then we looked at where are there clusters of those. And then we looked at how would we get sewer service to those clusters and identified which ones were most feasible. So there was a recent article, and it got a lot of press, talking about taking money away from muck dredging and using it to address more septic to sewer. And so this table at the bottom kind of shows you the similar information to what was in the previous slides. Those 15,000 septic tanks in the top row that are 0 to 55 yards from the water, they're responsible for about 300,000 pounds, 3/4 of the loading. If we were to try to address all of those, we would need roughly $1 billion just to provide the sewer lines to get to those houses. We would also need more wastewater treatment plants to treat that sewage. So the price tag there would be over $1 billion, which we don't have. So it's really important that we, focus on those most important septic systems, which is what we've done. In the top half of the slide, I've taken the groundwater, which is the first column on the left, and based on all of that groundwater well data that we collected through our 5-year study, we've split it out into, how much of that is coming from yards on septic versus yards on sewer versus yards on reclaimed water versus those natural areas. So you can see that the column for yards on septic, and it's important, you know, this is not just the impact of the septic, this is the whole yard. So this includes the fertilizer and the pet waste and everything else that's happening at that yard. It's a significant column, but it is less than the muck column. That's the third one from the left. And so, you know, as we take money away from muck and shift it towards more septic sewer, we're looking at diminishing returns. And you can see that in the table at the bottom, the far right column, the table at the bottom, those, if we were to do all of those top row systems, they would cost about $3,000 per pound. If we get into the next row, you know, those cost 5 times more at over $16,000 a pound. The bottom row, you know, those are over $75,000 per pound. So 25,000 times more expensive. So really, you know, quickly into diminishing returns on septic to sewer. So in addition to the septic to sewer projects, we also have septic systems that remain in the ground that are adjacent to existing sewer lines. And these are scattered through different neighborhoods, different communities, different cities throughout the county. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. So for septic to sewer projects, we're investing 120 million on 47 projects. These are extremely difficult projects to implement in existing neighborhoods with narrow right-of-ways, with loads of utilities in the right-of-ways, people's driveways, people's yards, just difficult, messy projects. And it's tough to design. They take a lot of time. So there are only 4 that are complete, though there are a dozen or more that are under construction right now. They will, once they're completed, connect nearly 5,000 of those top priority properties and reduce loading by about 100,000 pounds. All right, then we also have $11 million to connect, we call this our Quick Connect program, those septic systems that are adjacent to existing sewer lines. And so we've identified properties throughout that that can connect to nearby lines and are providing homeowner grants to do that. And so that will reduce another 21,000 pounds. And those are also fairly cost-effective projects. Then we have many of those highest priority septic systems that are not in a good cluster, are very difficult to reach. They're just not feasible to bring sewer service to. And so for those, we have grants, homeowner grants to upgrade to advanced nitrogen reducing septic systems. So there's nearly $30 million available for those grants. So far, we've been able to double that SORIL funding with state grants for most of the projects completed so far. So hopefully we'll be able to upgrade, you know, nearly double this 1,600 tank target, which would also increase the load reduction and reduce the cost per pound of these systems. For stormwater projects, we have over 65 million dedicated to stormwater projects. There are 1,726 stormwater outfalls to the lagoon to drain, to provide the drainage that we need to be able to handle the major rain events that we have here in Florida, like we just experienced. And so we need lots and lots of stormwater projects to address all of those outfalls. We've prioritized, you know, how much loading is coming out of those outfalls, and the the highest loading outfalls are without treatment are the ones that are targeted. So 233 projects are funded, 41 of those have been complete, and they will remove 278,000 pounds per year of nitrogen at a nice cost-effective rate of $242 per pound. Vegetation harvesting is a new kind of project that was added after the original plan adoption. You know, we have loads of drainage canals and they have nutrients in them, and those nutrients feed plant growth. And so over the last couple decades, the way that plant growth has been managed primarily is through herbicides. And so none of us like using herbicides, don't like all the potential harm that those herbicides can do. But most important to the health of the lagoon is that when those plants are poisoned and die and rot, they are releasing nutrients and they are consuming oxygen. And so it is the impact of that rotting vegetation that is more harmful than the herbicide use. Nonetheless, vegetation harvesting, if we just mechanically remove that vegetation, then we're pulling nutrients out of the system and we're avoiding the use of herbicides. And so the half-cent sales tax has been funding vegetation harvesting projects. There are currently 10 in the plan. 5 of those are already complete. They're removing tens of thousands of pounds of nitrogen reduction. And this cost per pound, the $68 per pound, sounds fantastic compared to all these other projects we've been talking about that are more. But it's not exactly apples to apples, because if you build a stormwater project, you build a pond, that pond is going to trap and remove nitrogen year after year after year. If you remove a septic tank and hook that home up to sewer, then you are avoiding that septic tank putting excess nutrients into the lagoon year after year after year. With a vegetation harvesting project, you're removing that vegetation one time. It's a single event. And so it needs to be more cost effective because you're only getting the benefit that one time. But just as an example, Melbourne-Tillman Water Control District has been at this for a little over a year now. They have harvested 1.8 million pounds of vegetation from the canals, as you see photographed there in the slide. And they send subsamples of that harvested vegetation to a lab to dry it and weigh it and measure how much nitrogen is in that vegetation. So based on that lab data and then interpolating out for the millions of pounds removed of total vegetation, that vegetation has contained 16,000 pounds of nitrogen, and they are just under 90% complete. So their total project, when we contracted with them, they were expecting to remove 1.3 million pounds of vegetation containing just under 13,000 pounds of nitrogen, but they have far exceeded that and they're not done yet. So these are really great projects that have immediate benefits to the lagoon. So moving on to muck. On the left side of the image, you see what healthy sandy sediment should support: seagrasses and benthic critters, little clams and ostracods and worms, and the seagrass supports this whole wonderful collection of flora and fauna, a high diversity and abundance that we love about our lagoon. And as you get into muckier and muckier sediments, you see less and less life. And in the truly organic mucky sediments, you see nothing but sulfur fixing bacteria. And so in this diagram, you see muck that has accumulated in a deep pocket of the lagoon. And as that muck is breaking down, as the organics in that muck are breaking down, they're releasing nitrogen and phosphorus into the water column, feeding algae blooms. So when we're dredging this muck out, we are removing that source of decaying nutrients that are feeding algae blooms. So we measure the benefit of these muck projects, not in terms of how much muck did we remove, but in terms of how much are we reducing that annual flux of nitrogen and phosphorus out of the sediments into the water column. So the plan includes $113 million worth of funding for 19 projects. Of those 4 complete, they will remove or reduce the annual flux by over 200,000 pounds. And the cost effectiveness there is about $500 per pound. Then we came up with this idea of interstitial water treatment. So what the heck is that? So when we dredge, one of the first things you have to do is separate the water from the solids. And so when we're squeezing the water out of the solids, there's a lot of already released nitrogen and phosphorus that's in that water. This treatment process is not required by our permits. It's something completely extra that we wanted to try to do. We asked the contractors if they thought they could do it. We asked them, how much they thought they could do. We set targets that they believed that they could meet. And then we left the means and methods up to whoever the low bid contractor is for the dredging work. They have to provide data to us to show why they think their proposed technology will work. And they have to share information with the permitting agencies as well to make sure that what they're doing isn't going to harm anything. Then we include performance targets in their contract, and as long as they meet those targets, they get paid. If they don't meet those targets, they don't get paid. And so currently it's on a daily basis. The days that they meet the targets, they get paid. The days they don't meet the targets, they don't get paid. So there's an economic incentive for them to meet the targets. The nitrogen target of 3,000 parts per billion, just 3 milligrams per liter, that is the same target as advanced wastewater treatment, except instead of doing it at a fixed wastewater treatment plant, they're doing it on this highly variable little postage stamp site where we're dewatering muck, and the material quality ranges from place to place, from moment to moment. It's a highly challenging target for them to meet. The phosphorus standard of 75 parts per billion is like 14 times more stringent than advanced wastewater treatment. The advanced wastewater treatment standard is 1,000 parts per billion, 1 milligram per liter. We set it this low because the lagoon needs really clean water and the industry can do it. So let's do it. So this is a graph of the performance data from the Grand Canal site. And so the red dots are the total phosphorus concentrations over time. Time is on the x-axis, concentration on the y-axis. The blue dots are the nitrogen. And so you can, and then I've added 2 lines at the bottom that show you, what the red line is the target for the red dots and the blue line is the target for the blue dots. So you want the dots to be below the respective line. And you see that most of the dots are below the line. Some of the dots are not below the line. So that's because of the high variability in these sediments as they move from, more organic to less organic, more clay, as they move from the dredge moves from area to area. The makeup of that material is different, and you have to adjust the dials on the treatment system. And so you'll see that, you know, they'll miss phosphorus on a day, but they hit the nitrogen target, or they hit the nitrogen target, but they miss the phosphorus target. But then within a day or two, they've sorted it out and they've got it back working. In the MIMS contract, the contractor was not meeting the targets, and so they weren't getting paid for the treatment. And after some period of time, they decided that it wasn't worth their investment to keep trying to meet the targets, and they gave up. And we were very frustrated by that, but there was nothing in the contract that allowed us to hold them to it, because it was just a pay for performance standard. If you meet the standard, you get paid. If you don't meet the standard, you don't get paid for the treatment. You still get paid for the dredging, but you don't get paid for the interstitial treatment. So on the next project, we changed the contract language to say that if you're not meeting the standard for more than a couple weeks, we can shut you down. And so you see here with this Grand Canal project that, you know, yes, there are days, there are moments when they're not meeting the target, but on the whole, they are meeting the target, and they have improved over time. Moving on to restoration projects. This started as just oyster reefs, oyster bars along the shoreline, as pictured on the left, but it's expanded over the years to include shoreline plantings, from clam aquaculture, and we have one pilot seagrass project that's actually grant funded. And so, you know, all of these projects are really, we know that the lagoon isn't ready for large scale restoration yet, but there are areas and moments in time when these projects can succeed, and we are working to test different methodologies, different scales, different processes to see what works best in the Indian River Lagoon, so that as the lagoon water quality improves, we know what these systems need to succeed, and we know what's going to be the most cost-effective, most efficient design to get there. And so these projects are really hopefully setting us up to be ready to expand to a larger restoration scale as water quality improves. So for our oyster restoration, you know, we started out with Brevard Zoo doing oyster gardening with over 1,000 oyster gardeners up and down the lagoon. And to our amazement, what we found was oysters grew in those gardens hung from people's docks pretty much everywhere in the lagoon. So then the question was, okay, well, what happens when you put them on the bottom where there's less water flow and there's less oxygen? And so, you know, that's when the rubber hits the road. We did have some projects not do so well, but on the whole, these projects are doing very well. About 80% of them are meeting the density abundance targets. So this graph it's pairs of bars. So how many oysters of what size class did we put at a site initially? And then what does it look like a year and a half, 2-3 years later? And so you see that for those first two on the left side of the graph, they did not do so well. They were in canal areas without much flow, and so they haven't done well. But all the other ones are performing quite well, and the The colors there show you multiple size classes, which is really important, that not just the adult oysters that we put there in the first place survive. You need them to reproduce, you need spat to recruit, you need a good distribution of age classes for a site to be sustainable. We're working on public outreach and engagement. You know, there are a couple pieces of this. So Marine Resources Council has had the contract for outreach at schools and public events. That's through a partnership with 9 of the local municipalities. But then we also have a number of specific outreach programs targeting fertilizer, grass clippings, stormwater maintenance, and those sorts of programs. And MTN is our partner developing these campaigns. And the idea here is that we have this Lagoon Loyal website where we provide lots and lots of activities for people to do that will reduce their footprint on pollution on the lagoon, and they can turn those activities in for points, and then they can turn those points in for coupons for Lagoon Loyal businesses. And so the Lagoon Loyal businesses are providing discounts to encourage people to do lagoon friendly activities, things that will reduce pollution. And in turn, the people that are doing those activities are rewarding those businesses by doing their shopping at those Lagoon Loyal businesses. So we hope this program will snowball as we continue to grow it. All right, then it's not just about doing projects. We know that controlling pollution also comes from the regulatory side of things. And so separate, but in parallel with the half-cent sales tax, there are a number of things that have happened or are happening or can happen. So we have a countywide moratorium on the land application of biosolids. We've mandated the repair of those private lateral sewer lines. We already have mandatory sewer connections, but some of the cities are adopting mandatory sewer connections. If you're next to a sewer line, you have to connect. The stormwater rules, we've been working with the state to develop statewide stormwater criteria, and Senator Mayfield, we're really hoping that that gets across the finish line during this legislative session. And I know Marine Resources Council has been a big advocate for that, along with low impact development and green infrastructure, with your conference coming up in a few weeks. Fertilizer use and retail signage. Marine Resources Council was really important in getting fertilizer regulations adopted up and down the lagoon years ago, and we continue to try to defend these ordinances. The county adopted an advanced septic overlay area that's countywide several years ago, based on that groundwater monitoring data, showed us how important septic loading is. So if you're close to the water, new development or redevelopment that has to replace a septic system, they can no longer use conventional septic. They have to use nutrient reducing septic systems or connect to sewer. Landscaping, tree protection continues to be really important in terms of nutrient uptake and buffering shorelines. Any kind of shoreline protection buffer to keep hardened surfaces away from open waters. We're not allowed to control herbicide use. We're preempted by the state. Local governments are preempted by the state on regulating herbicide use, but we can self-regulate, and we have done so by both the county and many of the cities have adopted these vegetation harvesting programs and are moving in that direction to reduce their use of herbicide. Water conservation efforts also reduce how much excess water is flowing around and picking up pollution and carrying it to the lagoon. And septic inspections, encouraging septic inspections. We're working with realtors and home inspectors to encourage home buyers to require septic inspections before they purchase a property. And then electrical vehicle fleets, as we move towards more electric vehicles, there's less emissions. Those emissions, vehicle emissions, account for about 1/3 of the nitrogen pollution that falls out of the sky onto the lagoon. So having high efficiency vehicles is an important part of the equation. So where are we? This series of images, satellite images, and then model images gives us an idea of what's going on with blooms. So the image on the left is from the super bloom. It's satellite imagery of the super bloom in 2011. And so the yellowy orange areas had the most intense bloom activity. And then the images next to that are model based from the Water Management District of how much a bloom activity you would expect based on the water conditions in 2011. It's that first image, and you see how closely that matches what the satellite imagery actually picked up. So that means the model's pretty good. And then the third image over is, what if we reduced the loading by 25%? The next one over, what if we reduce the loading by 50%? What if we reduce the loading by 75% of the total maximum daily loads that have been adopted for the Indian River Lagoon? And so you see that the closer we get to meeting those total maximum daily load targets, the better the water quality is. And hopefully that means then seagrasses can really recover. So the thermometer on the right shows you the dark blue is the projects that we've completed so far. So you see that we're only like 20% of the way. So that takes you to the bloom condition that's in the third image over. But the light blue shows you for all the projects that are under construction and in design. In a few years, when we've finished all of those, we'll be at 70-something% of our target. So that gets you to 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth image over, where the water quality is really looking much better. And hopefully we'll see seagrasses begin to naturally recover way faster than they are now. A couple weeks ago, we had our algae harvester. We received a $999,000 grant from the state to test this algae harvesting technology. So of course we want to keep nutrients, we want to keep pollution out of the lagoon, we want to remove the legacy of nutrients from the lagoon. But until then, while we're still trying to reach our TMDLs, we're going to have harmful blooms. And is there something that we can do about those blooms proactively? And so that's what this harvester is about, chasing those blooms and seeing if we can scrub them out of the water. And as we do that, we're also removing nutrients. So this is just kind of a summary slide of all the different project types and where the dollars are going and how many projects and how cost effective they are. And we will produce this now annually with our annual plan updates to keep everybody informed of where their dollars are going. And if you want to know more about the projects, we have a lot of story maps, but this is the main one that houses all of the projects. And you can dial into specific project types or your neighborhood of interest, and you can see where projects are and what they're doing and how much funding they're getting. All the details about all the projects in the plan, 383 projects in the plan. So that took a lot longer with all the coughing than I expected it. My apologies. And our vision is very much like the MRC's Imagine vision, an Indian River Lagoon teeming with fish, birds, and wildlife that provides for recreation, economic vitality, and pride in our community. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for such a wonderful presentation. We've got a small in-house audience here just giving you a round of applause. That was such an amazing insight into an incredible program that's so important for our region. So I really appreciate your tenacity and your willpower in giving this presentation. I'm going to give your voice a break. So I'm going to take all of our questions here and the Q&A. I'm going to compile them into an email for you and send those off to you so you can complete those at your leisure. And then I'll send out to all participants so they can see everybody's questions, just so you can get a head start on your rest. So I wish you well. Thank you so much. And I hope you're feeling better soon.